To talk about the different styles. Let me share with you how some things. I think God works with coincidences. Whether you want to say it's a direct supernatural explosion at once or not, how He works with coincidences in that way. One of the churches in Thessaloniki, I remember this story now. Marianne reminded me in my senior development of my brain here. I'm losing things, but. It's called the Archeropiroto, which is like the story I said about Jesus and the napkin and his face and imprint, meaning about icon made without hands. Anyway, that, like the Church of St. Demetrius, was a church built in the 4th century, early 4th century. And when it was taken over by the Turks in 1439, it became a mosque. Well, in 1912, Macedonia was freed from the Turks. They left after the Balkan War, and the church was going to be reconsecrated. Now, you have to imagine there's no icons, nothing, and the clergy are trying to very hurriedly for the reconsecration hang up some icons, and they're just basically taking nails to the wall and hanging up like these kind of icons, some of them larger, of course. At one point, though, and this I thought was really kind of cool, as the priest is nailing the nail onto the wall, it's suddenly the nail breaks through and a whole hole opens up, and this rush of air to what he thought was a straight wall, air comes out. So he gets a candile, a candle, and he breaks them, and he looks in, and in there is literally a wing of the church building that they found out later, before the Turks took over the city. They knew a lot of icons and things would be desecrated, so they stored them all in this and put up a wall. And for 5 centuries, everybody just thought this was a straight wall. And when they did this, it's kind of cool when you think about it. They opened it up, and there's all these icons and ecclesial implements from the 13th, 14th centuries still stored in there in that kind of way. Because again, the Ottomans, like a lot of Muslims, are against imagery, and they would gouge icons, destroy them, and so forth, because it's idolatry and so on and so forth. Sadly, there's some Christians who think along those lines as well. But anyway, but the other thing, there are experiences you have in the midst of prayer when you're doing icons, and I'm going to share this one that was, again, how, what, where, why, I don't know. I was doing a corpus, like I show you, the figure you can get separately down. And we were in Colorado, which I wasn't used to doing icons out there. And one of the things, because you're at a higher altitude and things are drier, and things we had to fight with the idea that the paints, that would dry out fast. And so I had a piece of wood, and it wasn't the best quality hardwood that I could have gotten. I cut it out in the outline of the crucified Jesus. And then I proceeded to do, which is when you put the gesso, this white glue, made out of a mix of rabbit fat and other things like that, this white glue over the wood. And then you start painting. Well, I'd done the face of Jesus, but what happened was, I put, and we'll get into this, icon paint is done by layers. You do the darks first, and slowly move to the lighter colors. But you have a couple of coats. I once said it in Greek, heria, which means hands. They say a couple of hands of paint, we say a couple of coats. You put 2 or 3 coats of the one color, you let it dry, and then you put on another one. Well, the problem was, because of the climate, it dried too fast, and sometimes the paint would dry and crack. So what I did was, because I'd literally almost be like almost done with the icon, and it would start to dry and crack again. Well, I decided to put gesso over it. I actually sanded the whole thing down. I smoothed it down to, you could still see the face and the detail in paint, but wherever it had cracked, I smoothed that all down. And then I said I was going to paint all over it. So I painted all over it, and this time the paint wasn't cracking and peeling anywhere except the face, making the original face constantly come through. I would paint over it again, put a few layers of paint, do the face of Jesus all over again, and only the spot of the face would dry out, crack, and make the original face come through. To put it Is that creepy? Is that what you call it, Christiana, creepies?
Yeah, creepy.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, sometimes when we talk stories like this, Christiana will go, Dad, that creeps me out.
I got creeped out easily when I was a child.
Yeah, you were. You were. But anyway, so you do have even some weird experiences like this in the end. Is what's going on there? Why did it keep doing that? But anyway, what I want to share is real fast. There is a process of prayer, confession, receiving the Eucharist regularly, focused on the subject matter. And then what you do is you take the wood and it's all smoothed out and you try to get a hardwood, like a birch or something like that. No pine, all that kind of stuff is lousy. But the idea, there's a spiritual discipline with that, of the idea of smoothing out the rough edges in our own lives. Gesso is all white. It's like a glue. It seals the wood. But the idea, are you in a process of purification? The early Christians understood that the process of salvation was purification, enlightenment, and then theosis, which means union with God. You can't grow in the Christian life, to use Jesus' analogy about the thorns and the weeds, without pulling up the weeds constantly. There has to be room for the other aspects to grow. But anyway, so the white, and then you start to do a rough outline, and the first thing you do after you make out the border is, and it's all white, you put in, and I'll give an example with this, with Jesus. It's not probably, even here you can cut, you put in the gold first, the gold or gold leaf, okay? The aspect of the Holy Spirit being present there. So the halo would go in first, and if you did gold leaf background, even that would be gold. All right? That would go in first. So either gold paint or gold leaf, which is very delicate to work with. Then you draw the outlines, detail-wise, like the nose, the eyes, all this kind of stuff, the hands in general. And this is the amazing part. You work from very dark colors to slowly, slowly lighter, 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 lighter. Now, let me tell you the process. I was blessed to have an iconographer, Andreev, who during the communist period was able to learn at a monastery the ancient practice. The paint, you can use acrylic, and I have used acrylics when I've done icons because it's a very delicate process to take the powders and see, the one thing is it has to be all natural ingredients. That's why acrylics don't necessarily count. The tempera powder, fertilized eggs that you crack open, you mix with the pigment, and I have to tell you, it's because it's alive in a sense, it moves. And every time, because every egg is different, you may use the same amount of pigment, the same exact pigment, and it'll be even a different shade every time. And you're doing this layer by layer by layer by layer. But there's a final process after it's all there. You take an oil, you could even take like a varnish or something like that, or a pine seed oil or something like that, and you heat it. The oil's heated, and then put over the icon. Now, what some people do today in the States is they'll put the oil over it and then stick the icon in the oven. And you go, Mommy, Jesus smells like roast beef. No. Anyway, lamb, right? Let's make it spiritual. All right, so anyway, but let me tell you what happens, and it's an awesome thing to watch, is the oil soaks through every layer and brings everything to the surface. It's an awesome thing to see. Because when you first see it, before you do this process, it doesn't look like as much until that oil is heated. And again, the idea that every level of us is pulled to the surface. What's hidden or suppressed within is brought to the surface for the purpose of healing in that way. So, and it takes a while to do this. I mean, it's nothing you can just bang out in a day, necessarily. When I worked with the iconographer, and it is a discipline. As he said, and he's a genuinely, he's still alive, his son now does icons. It's been hard because he's getting a little arthritic and so forth. But when you do this for real, it's, as he said, you will do the first 10 icons exactly how I do them. No variation. And there are rules. I mean, there's boundaries, there's canons about what can be depicted or not depicted, and so on and so forth. And I'm not going to go into every little detail, but Christ is usually, like I said, the red, the blue, though this is kind of faded on purpose kind of thing. The hand like this is the idea of blessing type of thing. I don't know, there's different ideas of what this symbolizes. I mean, I find if I do this and I move my hand, that the natural thing for my ring finger is to bend. If I go like this, just without thinking,
Yeah.
it naturally bends. So somebody either thought, Father, Son, who was crucified, and Holy Spirit, you could do that. There's an attempt to say it's the letters of Jesus' name. In Greek, to have symbolic thing, they would do the first and last letter of a word. So you see, the iota, and that's a sigma in Greek. That's one of the ways you could do a sigma. It's like a C. Isus, and then the he and the sigma, which is Christos. So somebody thought this maybe looks like Jesus Christ, like the I, the C, the he, the X-looking thing, and another thing. Whatever. The idea is blessing. Okay? And either one is valid. But I have to tell you a cute story where somebody visiting and their children were with them years ago, and they wanted to know if Jesus had arthritis or something in his hand.
So you're saying that that's Jesus Christ?
Yes.
At the top.
Yes.
Yeah, Jesus Christ.
And in here, in the halo, is Oon. Oon is from the Septuagint, Exodus chapter 3, when Moses says to God in the burning bush, which God should I say sent me? And in the Greek translation, it is Ego eimi Oon. I am the being one. I am existence. I am who I am, etc., etc. And in there is Oon. This is the being one. This is the one that was in the burning bush. This is the word of the Lord who was in the burning bush communicating to Moses, who's everything that Yahweh is. He's holding the gospel. Some of them will have open to a scripture sometimes. This is Christ the teacher because the book is closed. That way. It could also be considered a Pandokratora, the Almighty that would be in the dome. A lot of times the gospel book would be closed. There's Christ the teacher, Christ the good shepherd, and so on and so forth in that way. The longer hair, and we're not saying Jesus necessarily didn't have longer hair. Maybe, who knows, in the last several months of him running around the Holy Land, maybe he didn't hit the barber or get the old shears out to trim. But we also know that this was a sign of what emperors wore. It's a sign of it's an imperial hairstyle. And as a result of that, later Byzantine emperors would have longer hair. But also, if you know about the East, monastics, once they tonsure, cut their hair, they never cut it ever again, and it goes real long. I remember when I was in Greece the first time, and I thought it was an old lady, because the hair was in a bun. Then the priest turned around and I went, okay. Okay. Different styles. You see this. This is a softer, what I would call a soft style, an Athonite style. This is actually from a recent iconographer, Mount Athos. This is a Romanian style. It's a very deliberate. It's not like this is faded, so don't think that. This is the way they do their icons. Okay? So I want to point out there's different styles in iconography. It's not all the same. There's variations here and there that we can point out. And even the iconographer there's something of the iconographer that can come in, even within the boundaries or the canons of whatever. There's certain things they can do, but there are definite ways that certain things are depicted. Do we have a crucifixion in here? Jesus, when Jesus is in the icons, he actually looks like he's suspended on the cross. Actually looks like he's suspended on the cross. Okay? He doesn't look like he's actually being held fastened there as much as when you look at the icons, and part of that is to say that he deliberately takes this on. He's there, in fact, like the hymns go, ascending the cross in the flesh, in a sense. Not that he wasn't really nailed and so on and so forth, but to emphasize, thank you. Okay. The idea of being at rest. because it's trying to reflect the spiritual reality at the same time. So the idea, Christ has always got this cross with the O on in there, the being one, the I am who I am, basically, okay? You look at it, and it is like he's suspended here. The nails even in the hands, and you know, were they in the hands, were they in the wrists? Could have been in either one. But the point of the iconographer is, again, he willingly took this on. It's a deliberate, I'm taking this. I'm receiving this freely of my own choice. There's the pierced side, the idea of the bride of Christ coming about. The piercing of the side in John's Gospel is not so much to affirm that he was really human and really killed and not just a hologram, but also the fact that in the story, like Adam and Eve, God puts Adam to sleep and opens his side to bring his bride out. In John's Gospel, the church begins to be birthed, because in John and Matthew, instead of saying Jesus gave up his spirit, it actually says Jesus gives out the Spirit. John especially says that it's when the giving of the Spirit happens that Jesus will draw all people to him. The reality will happen. His side is pierced, blood and water come out, blood, his life, water, us, baptism, everything else mixed together. But it is the beginnings of, if you will, in miniature, the process of Pentecost beginning, because it's Jesus' bride coming out of his side. Okay? You have the Theotokos. Interestingly, even though they try to not show much emotion in icons, unlike some of the Renaissance paintings where she's very stoic, interestingly in iconography she's definitely crying. She's definitely crying. And it's very potent because it's not just that she loses her son, and this is very much in the hymns of Holy Week. What would it mean to feel like you lost God? What would it mean to feel like if I thought I lost God? That's the beloved disciple. That's the Longinus, the guy who speared him, who would, according to tradition, become a Christian himself. There was a tradition that Jesus was not only Mount Zion, the place where traditionally Abraham was supposed to sacrifice Isaac, and of course God providing the ultimate sacrifice through Jesus, but that even there was a tradition that that's where Adam was quote-unquote buried. Okay? The sun and the moon, the idea of a cosmic shaking up of everything, that kind of imagery, and so forth, and the darkness in the background. And in the sign on the cross, contrary to what is put in, and only contrary in a negative sense, but contrary to what you see in other paintings, and sadly, which is not part of our tradition, instead of saying Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Rexus Nazareus Iodorum, Jesus Nazareus Vasileus ton Iudeon, it's supposed to say Vasilevsis Loxis, the King of Glory. Okay? Because we're not trying to talk about a historical reminiscence, unless you mean that literally, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of Israel, the King of the Jews, which he is, that kind of thing. So anyway, that's an example. But you see even right there the difference in style. And these are two actually were Greek iconographers. So it's even within the regions there's variations and differences in styles. Okay? Now, for the Orthodox, let me give you an example, because Orthodox even fell into trying other styles. This comes from my in-laws from the island of Chios, and it was painted in 1902. Okay? Now, that's nice. It evokes piety, but it's clearly influenced by another genre. And one would say, if you talk to very serious iconographers, Western paintings, even pious ones, they evoke emotions, sentiment, and so forth, but do they speak to the theological truth? Because would you know, if you didn't know the story, would you know who this is? That's the other thing. In icons, it clearly will tell you what it is. There are words that say, this is the crucifixion, this is the Annunciation, this is the birth of Christ, this is the etc., 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 etc. So there's no mistaking. And I remember at the stained glass windows at the old St. Matthew's, where I didn't know who some of those people were. There was nothing that indicated. Could have been the Virgin Mary, could have been this, could have been that. I guessed who might have been St. Matthew, because even when the Lutherans had it, it was called St. Matthew's. So what?
Are you saying it doesn't say what it...
Well, this does.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say.
Evangelis Musso Theotoko. But if you take a Western painting, it usually doesn't tell you.
Oh, okay.
The style is influenced to be, quote unquote, a little more realistic type of thing. But the point is not to focus on purely the physical. It's kind of like using the crucifixion of example. How many of us have heard grueling sermons to bring out every detail in Jesus' physical torture? You know, it's like watching Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ, you know, like really, let's go to town here. And while I don't want to denigrate or water down the fact that there was physical suffering, the reality is not about the physical suffering. The reality is about, this is someone who takes the full weight of death, the world's evil, hatred, fears. The whole reality, he lets it fall on him. That's far more than any purely physical descriptions of the tortures Jesus went through can ever do. So to sit there and tell me how many times he was whipped and how the cat o' nine tails ripped meat off his back, well, you know what? And again, I'm not denigrating the sufferings of Christ. Don't hear this. But other people were whipped. Other people, there's martyrs. We have good old Saint Charalambos in there, who spent a year under Roman torture, having skin peeled off him regularly, and all kinds of things happened to him. You know, I could show you what Father Roman, the communist prison at Pestești in Romania from 1949 to 52, the tortures these people were subjected to for 3 straight years. I have a DVD with the interviews of the people who survived that. And they were there for their faith. So it's not about the physical sufferings of Jesus, but you see, like paintings that try to depict that. But it's supposed to take us to the fuller picture. That's a theological, spiritual reality, not just a physical, sentimental one.
So it's not that the physical is wrong,
No.
depiction of it, it's that it can't stand alone.
Right, it can't stand alone.
Okay, gotcha.
Right, right. Let's see if I can find one. Here's, you can look at these up a little closer later. This is one of Adam and Eve being created and then getting the boot from paradise. Which is something we're going to celebrate tomorrow with a Sunday of Forgiveness. It's remembering, recalling Adam's being ejected from paradise. Okay, and here's the top. It's kind of cute. Here's Christ creating him. He's holding a little man, type of thing. And the angels, you know, interfacing. And then down here when they're being removed. But the cool thing is Christ waiting for them to come back. And of course, God, that in Christianity, God would provide a means for them to be able to come back in. Did all that. Let me think here. Icons have stories. Now, even with the stylization, I can't resist sharing this. This was given to us by my wife's side of the family. And like the one that's there, this is supposed to be St. Nicholas. Okay. This is pretty old. It's probably a good century and a few decades old.
Wow.
In the family for a long time. It used to have, sometimes you see like in this one of the Annunciation, they would put that metal overlay. And interestingly, the reason the Byzantines did that sometimes was as the paint wore, they would cover them with metal to keep it from fading all the way, or if you couldn't see the figures anymore, but at least the face could be seen.
That one was silver.
That
The one
was,
that St. Nicholas was
right.
silver.
You're still here. I thought you left.
You left. That was Yaya's, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, yeah, yes. It's Leah's now. So anyway, here's good old St. Nick, and there was silver on this. Well, this tells a story, and I think we need to understand this, how Orthodox understand their icons. When they were struggling, was it during the Nazi occupation?
During the Depression.
Yeah, during the Depression. This is pretty wild. The silver is gone because they had to sell it. They wouldn't starve. What's holding the clasp up is a thing from a garter. The point being, icons tell stories. Not only in the overall sense, but even specifically the people that have them in that way. So it reflects, and amazing how the face has stayed intact in the hands in all this. But it tells a very potent kind of story. And icons, I mean, they're very personal too. They're not only liturgical in the collective communal sense, they're very personal. They become very personal. This one, that's the Annunciation, this was my grandmother's, Her name was Evangelia, and the word for is evangelismos. And I know it's not even in a Western style, but it does say evangelismos and everything else, and so forth. And by the way, in Orthodoxy, she's not depicted, in the icons, she's not depicted as praying. She's usually depicted, oh, I should bring one out. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Doing everyday ordinary, she's actually depicted sitting at a loom. And the idea that God invades us in the everyday ordinary actions of life. But anyway, later there would come the imagery that what was being woven in her was Christ being enfleshed, as the angel's talking to her, and she says yes. But this has a story because it comes from my grandfather, who gave it to his wife, and my grandmother carried this all of her life. My grandmother barely made the first grade in Greece, because when her mother died, the father was this, women don't need education, you know, this kind of thing. And he had 4 daughters, which back then was paying dowries and everything else, that was, oh my God, you know, this kind of thing. But my grandmother, the only thing she could write was her name. And that's why this is very special for me. And for Leah, because Leah's named after my grandmother. So they have stories, they're so interlaced with a person's life as well as their spiritual life. You know, these aren't just nice pictures type of thing. But when we understand what an icon is, too, because it's about a window to the ultimate reality that's already present here among us. It's not just sentimentality, it is the ultimate reality of God invading, touching us, even as through a glass dimly type of thing. So, thoughts, questions? Oh, I'm going to show you one other side, which I'm glad, Dustin, you got the book. There's a couple of books here, but one of my favorite iconographers, and God uses people even when they struggle with limitations. Gregory Krug lived in France in the 20th century. Gregory, an incredible Christian man, struggled with depression horribly. Actually, sometimes he had himself committed to a psychiatric hospital and things like that. But in the middle of that, in his struggle for spirituality, and he's actually not being considered for canonization, how, you know, kind of like there's some people that the way they handle their depression makes them reach into areas that some of us who don't have to struggle with those things can reach into. Kind of like the example, like we know now from the history, if Abraham Lincoln had had medications available to him then that we have today, he might not have been as great a president. I think it's the case with this guy. But I'm going to show some examples of Gregory iconography. These are painted sadly on plaster walls that can never be taken down. So if you go visit, there's a chapel he did in France. And when you go in front of an icon, just let yourself be in front of it. It's almost like soak. His use of colors, the faces are incredible to me. Okay. Here's one. This is actually the style of the guy I worked with, Andreev, Christ, the Pantocrator, and so forth. Image. Okay. And you can see little variations along the way.
Father, can you show it over there? I don't think.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The book will be available up here, but I wish, this is one of the things I wish I had, like could project onto a wall. Here's one of the Theotokos and child, again. There's something about the face that's great, and this is like a indentation in the wall that he did. Okay. And the Theotokos and who? Look at this.
Where is this chapel in France?
It's in the book.
It's in the book.
I've never been to France. I wish I could go. I mean, these icons grab me like nobody's business. Yeah, it's a Theotokos with Joachim and Anna, meaning her parents. Which is neat because we forget that Jesus grew up in a family that the Jesus we know even in his humanity is the result of the connections he had with his family as well as with God himself. Anyway, good old Gregory. And you can see little variations along the way. But there's this one chapel that he did the whole thing, and like I said, the sad part is, It's right on the plaster, and it can never be taken down. So if something ever happens to the church, sadly, John the Baptist, one of the archangels, looks like Michael. Good old St. Paul. Sometimes iconography, if they felt they had a description of the person, like Paul is pretty standard. Receding hairline, hunched back. That's actually a rough description. And there's coins they had, even they found from a late 2nd, early 3rd century, kind of imprints or something. They claim to be Peter and Paul, what they look like, maybe at the end of their life. Like Peter, it's interesting, in the Last Supper icon, he's depicted as an old man. Well, he was Jesus' age, quote unquote. But by the time people remembered him, is the tradition, you know, like Rome or wherever, and so forth, he would have been an old man. Saint Bridget, not Bridget, come on, brain, of Paris. No. Genevieve, thank you, brain. Saint Genevieve, yes, an Orthodox saint folk. Saint Genevieve of Paris.
I thought that was a mafioso family.
Yeah.
That Dad just talked about. Genovese.
Yeah, they'll make icons of them right now. This, I have to tell, this one of Saint Seraphim was one that really grabbed me. I love Saint Seraphim of Sarov. Died in 1833. Very potent story. Very much, he's called the Saint Francis of the Orthodox world, but very potent personality, and more closer to our time compared to Francis. Not to put down or denigrate Saint Francis. Anyway, and the last thing I simply want to say is, that in light of this, in Orthodoxy you do Old Testament as well as New Testament figures. So you will see, which is interesting because in the Orthodox Church in the East, we actually have feast days for the Old Testament saints as well as the New. Even in the Catholic Church, they only the name days are only for the New Testament and after type of thing. And here, I remember a Jewish guy from the New York Times came to see our iconography class, and he was surprised when Andreev told him, "Yeah, you could do an icon of Moses or Ruth or Deborah or anybody." Okay. Porcelain is not a good example, but anyway. Yes, Marianne.
You mentioned before about when you pray before an icon to kind of soak.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts on praying before icons? Advice?
There is a time, it's interesting, what an icon can help us do is learn that it's not just our words. Our words may help us get focused, but I think there is a thing of understanding of having some frame of reference that, what do we physically express? And yes, we could be praying sitting down, I could be praying driving my car, and so on and so forth, but when I'm in my, sometimes I may need to do a couple of I call them warm-up prayers, to be honest, because as I shared with somebody else just now, I don't just flip into spiritual mode. I'm sorry, I'm not one of these great masters of prayer and so forth. I mean, even the reason there's even orthros before liturgy is you don't walk in suddenly spiritually, this kind of thing. It's like little by little, you need to soak all this and so forth. So, but how do I soak? And actually just be aware of whose presence I'm in. And every icon, even of every saint, by the way, is ultimately an icon of Jesus because, like I said about the eyes being always the eyes of Jesus. Because even like we know certain people whose presence will be in, and they reflect Christ to us, very real. But anyway, I think the whole thing is, when can we get beyond the words, almost in a way? And I remember a long time ago, a person who was very sick with the flu, and they, Orthodox will talk about having a rule of prayer, like getting up, saying certain prayers in the morning, reading some scripture a little bit, and so on and so forth. 10, 15, 20 minutes or whatever. Or whatever you're available. And I know if you're a mom, that's even more difficult. But anyway, and then trying to pray at night and so on and so forth. And so this person was very concerned that, because they were very, very sick with fever and even fighting nausea and everything else, and headaches, that they couldn't do their rule of prayer. And I smiled because it's like, it's about a relationship, not about requirements in that way. But I said, you know what? Light your candili, your lambada in front of your icon, and be sick in the presence of the Lord. Just let yourself be with God. And there's something very real about that. And you know, you do get the sense of the presence. I mean, I think that's the thing ultimately is, like the window at the prison, what's coming through? It's both communication out to us and us. Oh, well, that was the other thing I wanted to mention real fast. You know how in art, the vanishing point goes out beyond? In iconography, it's very deliberate that the vanishing point isn't behind the icon, it's out to the person. It's out to the person. There's one of my favorite, we had one when my wife was giving birth to our kids.
They gave it away, I don't remember who gave it to by accident. But it was meant to go there.
Yeah, it was meant to go
It was a sweet kissing.
Yeah. There's one I love of Jesus hugging his mom and kissing her. And
It was my focal point for each child.
yeah, when she was giving birth, that was the icon in every birth of each one of our children. And it was very potent because of that, because of the idea of what she went through, but the presence of God and the reality, not just the sentimental feeling, but the reality of life, and the life at whose root is God. And for the women that have gone through labor, you know you're not exactly feeling very prayerful, unless in the middle of a contraction going, oh, anyway. So. Yeah, it took five times for my wife to finally get the epidural. But anyway, but see, that's what I mean. They connect to life, and even in many Orthodox funerals, and I've done a few, where when the person dies, the icon that was special to them will be also there by the casket. Now, we don't bury the people with the icon because icons are meant to be used. Like old Bibles, when they wear out and they're no good, we will actually bury them, burn them, or something like that. If they get so decrepit and they can't be restored, and so forth. But, like I said, the vanishing point comes out. It's up to us. It's a very deliberate artistic style, very deliberate in that way. And the sense, I have to tell you, the sense of their expression, and sometimes it's a sense of peace, and peace means not like being on Valium. Peace means everything's in harmony here. But it doesn't mean they didn't have emotions. And when you know some of the figures in church history or in the scriptures, the way their personalities, some of them are very bombastic, very gregarious, very, you know, a wild and crazy kind of guy, like the old saying goes from Steve Martin. But it's the idea that however they were, regardless of whatever, even within their personalities, there was a harmony. They were harmonizing with God, with creation, with other people, in the whole way that the Lord was wanting. And so it's the sense of peace. But I have to tell you, some of them really reflect, sometimes like you'd seen sometimes in the Theotokos, she's smiling. Sometimes also, one of my favorite icons is the, no, it's all right. There's a church in Istanbul now called the Hora Church that miraculously, when the Muslims took it over as a mosque, they didn't gouge out or chop up the icons, and they just put kind of like plaster over the icons, and they've been able to meticulously peel away the plaster so that you see all the frescoes now. And in the altar area, it's called Osios Lukas, in the altar, in the apse, is not, this is, shows you that you can have variations in Orthodox churches. It isn't just the icon of the Virgin and Child. I remember one other thing I wanted to show. Could somebody get me the Transfiguration, or even the icon of the descent into Hades, honey? Oh, that's me. It's all right. But if you bring your one, that's not bad. If you didn't hear me.
Yeah.
Okay. This is from 1 Peter. That Jesus dies once and for all. He descends to preach to the souls in prison, meaning the place of death, the righteous and the unrighteous. They will clearly let you know that they're not, definitely there's no physicality to this, and they put this bullet-shaped, sometimes more rounded
Yes,
shaped.
there's the Transfiguration.
Yeah, that's a good example too. It's called a mandorla, and they're trying to tell you that even though there's some physical description of this, this is something that can't be physically described. I mean, you can see that in the Gospels that just describe the Transfiguration. You know, what does it look like? Well, his garments are so white that they're gleaming and almost blinding. I mean, it's all kinds of different descriptions. So the thing is, this is beyond something that physicality can't even the level of physicality that's allowed in an icon can't even begin to touch. Well, then with the same thing with the icon, and by the way, you'll never guess which one's Moses and which one's Elijah, because of the usual movie versions. The younger guy is Moses, and the older guy is Elijah. Got his hair done for the occasion. But he's holding the tablets of the law. That's one of the ways it's known. Same thing here. Jesus descends to proclaim to the souls in prison the righteous and the unrighteous. And this is one of my favorite icons. It was in the apse of the church of the Hora, Osios Lukas. Beautiful. I mean, this thing spreads out. And it was done in like the 14th century. 13th, 14th century. Anyway, and here's Jesus. I'm sorry for if it's too small and people's eyes are going to be. He's in white, which means in the spirit, that kind of thing. He's on the broken gates of death and hell. Okay, that's supposed to be the devil, stripped naked, thrown in. There's busted padlocks, keys, everything all around here, chains and so forth. What I like about this icon, it's very much like 1 Peter. There's some people with halos, and some people without. He's pulling an old man and an old woman out of their stone sarcophagi. It's Adam and Eve. But the thing I have to tell you, at the Church of the Hora, at that, I mean, Jesus is like life-size. It's a very big fresco. And I laughed, and when I was there, because I was taken along years ago as an interpreter for an ecumenical Christian group, they said, "What are you laughing at?" I said, "Look at his face." I said, "What?" I said, "If you put a caption, it's like, nobody messes with me," type of thing. And so the fact that in iconography you can allow for some sense or some level of emotion, but you're not trying to reach for sentimentality. See what I'm saying? That this is beyond a sense of emotion and so on and so forth. But anyway, this is very classic. So this is the descent into Hades. The actual resurrection icon is the women coming to the tomb empty and so on and so forth. Very deliberate images. The birth of Jesus and the resurrection icon of the women coming to the tomb. The manger and the tomb look exactly alike. They're both in a cave. The manger looks like a sarcophagus. You see the sarcophagus. And even the burial cloth looking like the wrappings of the swaddling cloth. Very deliberate. Very deliberate. That's another good one because it shows the three levels. Heaven, earth, with Joseph at the bottom, the midwives washing Jesus, and in the middle is Christ and his mother. He's in the manger, the animals symbolizing stubbornness and empty-headedness, an ox and a donkey, but they're feeding at the manger. And it's there is where heaven and earth connect, is the point, in the incarnate Jesus. Anyway, any other questions or comments?
Did you see a weeping icon back in the 70s?
Yeah, I did.
Was that the only time?
No.
Did you actually see it weeping?
Yep. I did. It was actually, the mind-blowing part was, there was a glass front, and it was like coming through the glass. It was the weirdest thing. It was the weirdest thing. Anyway, any questions, thoughts, comments? Yeah, Katina.
I have a question. Not question. You answered my question already. The icon where Panagia is crying, I would always think it is not because he's dead, because she knows that he will be resurrected, but of the suffering. That's my only.
Yeah, the suffering, but also my mother-in-law registered this reality to me when my sister-in-law died, and I said to her, I can't imagine what it would be like to lose a child. And my mother-in-law said, because I said, you have a taste of what the Virgin Mary went through at Golgotha. She said, no. And because she knew the hymns of the church, she goes, Panagia lost God for 3 days. And even if you think he's coming back, to not have him for 3 days, and that's actually a sense for us, do we take God's presence so much for granted that if we thought that God was gone for 3 days, we'd be okay. The Virgin Mary is an image of, she is so in touch and in sympathy with her son, the idea that to lose God, even for 3 days.
Well, that is the answer you gave me, because I always thought.
Right. It is, yes, about the suffering, no question about it, but it's the fuller picture.
Thank you.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
It kind of ties what you asked Marianne about icons being the presence of icons. I know for me, we have them in our house. And for me, it communicates, it transcends time. They're, the saints and all that are in with me. And they also reflect to me, especially for the saints, that their life, they struggle with temptations and stuff that we suffer here, but they made it. They're there with them. So they're always an encouragement for me that they're all around me in my house, reflecting that, and that we are together. At that moment, we are all together. Here, everywhere, we're all together. And for me, visually, it helps to make that the truth. The truth comes together. So I just...
In many Orthodox homes like the mezuzah, as you come in the front door even of a home, would be like an icon of Jesus. And they would, the Orthodox, before they'd actually greet the host of the home, they would venerate the icon. And the idea that the real head of the house is Jesus. He's the real head of the house. But the neat thing is, like my wife is saying, is that if you read the lives of these guys weren't perfect. They had stuff. They had all kinds of stuff. Some of them struggled with addictions, obsessions. I mean, God bless them, you know. And like my wife says, these are real people. These are reflecting real people who kept loyal to the Lord, who understood God's loyalty to them and God's faithfulness to them, and kept that, as it were. It doesn't mean they didn't fall down a lot of times. I think it is when you guys who have, we know, especially when we have families, we have kids, how life is crazy at home. Life is totally crazy. And yet the Lord's there, and we're framing all of that reality of the immediate realities, small r, in the large R reality type of thing. That's always there connected. God's not separate from that. He's right there in the midst of all the crazy realities. So even if you're yelling at your kids, or if they're yelling at you.
Well, and that description that you gave kind of reminds me of the communion of saints in the creed.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Now, that's what the communion of saints in many ways means to me, that somehow everybody's with us
Right.
in ways,
Right.
and the icons give us a chance to
Right.
visually make that connection rather than just somewhere out there.
Right. Thank God. Thank you. Anything else? I hope this was helpful.
It is wonderful.
Great.
Very well.